Can you hear me? Welcome, guys. Welcome. Let me just remove and show the time. Welcome to Caribbean Thoughts. Today is Juneteenth in the US, in the United States. We're celebrating the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation, because slavery was abolished, but it wasn't abolished in all of the US states because of, there was a chasm between the North and the South. So, and it took a while for the proclamation. So it was, everybody wasn't free, but all the slaves were proclaimed free on June 19th. So they have Juneteenth. So today is Juneteenth. And I actually shared a post today. I tweeted a very important point today, and I want to share that tweet. I said earlier today, if I could find it. I'm not sure why. I said earlier today, if you guys follow me on Twitter, I said earlier today, today is Juneteenth, as we reflect on and celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation of slavery, or the emancipation of slavery, leading to universal suffrages and human rights here in the US on this Juneteenth. Let's not forget our brothers and sisters in Haiti still fighting for these same rights. That's human rights. Again, as we reflect and celebrate the emancipation of slavery, leading to universal suffrages and human rights here in the US on this Juneteenth, let's not forget our brothers and sisters in Haiti still fighting for these same rights that is human. And of course, I appeal to everybody to sign the petition. Sign the petition for Haiti, that Caribbean government support a Haitian-led solution against foreign interference. And we will have some time to talk some more about Haiti, but we won't be able to talk about Haiti today. Today's class, we won't be talking about the situation in Haiti, but we're going to go back to what initially we wanted to talk about. Last week, we were supposed to have the Urban Indian Heritage Society joining us to talk about a very important issue, of the issue of lineage, the issue of heritage, which speaks to the issue of identity, which is part of which is a topic that we consider in Caribbean thought. In Caribbean thought, yes, we deal with the issue of identity and with the issue of heritage. Those are important issues, and we always begin with that. In fact, you want to begin. You said when you begin the study of Caribbean thought, which is diverse currents that have helped to shape Caribbean, as you have part of the beginning is to begin with with an identity. You begin with an identity. You begin in terms of who you are, because we said that the Caribbean peoples are a hybrid people. They are a mixture from different races, from different ethnicities. When you read history, when you read one of our main texts, that looks at the early, from the 1500s up to now, up to the 1800s, Arawaks the African, when you read, it talks about the history of the Caribbean people. when you look at that, of course, part of what they you on and roots and the book and the film that 12 years of slavery and so on. But we go beyond. Where do you begin? Do you begin with the African? Where do you begin? We said the Caribbean. We said that in the Caribbean Reader, and in the Caribbean Reader, is it Gervin who said that the Caribbean is an invention of the 20th century, and we talked about that, the Caribbean being an invention of the 20th century. The Caribbean, in terms of it being part of that new world, that discovery or that capture. We said it's a discovery depending on your perspective, depending on who's talking, depending on the dominant view or the dominant context within which you find yourself. And that's pragmatic truth. We talk about different kinds of truth. You have pragmatic truth, coherence theory of truth, correspondence theory of truth. So when Christopher Columbus said that he discovered the Caribbean, it is true, but to others it is not. But then you say, but it depends on how you are perspective. It depends on your perspective. It depends on the truth, your truth, how you view truth. Yes. So all of that is of course important when you start to look at the whole issue. When you start, we said that it's an invention. Whatever the case is, it's an invention of the 20th century. The Caribbean is an invention of the 20th century, whether through slavery, but of course, or through, and it's an investment. The coming of the Europeans and the coming of the Africans signals something new for the Caribbean. The coming, because it's not just the Africans that came, the Europeans and the Africans came. But of course, the Africans came to outnumber the Europeans and the natives. But what is important is I want to address a very important issue. And I'm so happy that the Urban Indian Heritage Society is going to be joining us. I don't know if they're here as yet. I don't think so. They will join us to talk about the issue of heritage, the issue of lineage. Because what is at issue, and I think they probably might be joining us in a second. What is at issue is this. I don't know if who I had said this to some time ago about the issue of reclaiming in Caribbean theology. One of the things that Caribbean theology looks at is the issue of reclaiming one's heritage. And I'm going to make a point about that later on when we talk about one of the things that what Caribbean theology seeks to do. I believe next week or probably this Wednesday, hopefully this Wednesday, we will introduce the issue of Caribbean theology. And one of the things that Caribbean theology talks about is reclamation. And let me tell you, people might ask, what is the importance of Caribbean theology? What is the importance of heritage? What is the importance of developing one's identity? We said the Caribbean is an invention, but is the Caribbean really an invention? It's an invention, and it comprised of mixed people who have been detached and hybridized and made into dependent capitalist states. But outside of that, there's the Caribbean people today, however they exist, however they identify as West Indian people. Part of what has dogged Caribbean people, part of heritage seeks to the issue of richness, wealth, generational wealth. And I said to the Caribbean theology class last week, when we look at Caribbean, when you study Caribbean theology, one of the tenets, one of the important aspects of Caribbean theology is that it seeks to reclaim, it seeks to restore, and the issue of identity plays a very important part. One's identity, and I can't wait to get into that issue of identity, because this is very important when you start to look at the issue of identity. Phoenix is here. Phoenix, welcome to the class, Phoenix. It's good to see Phoenix from the Urban Indian Heritage Society is here, and we're going to introduce her in a second to begin the presentation. And I don't know if and Dr. Nolan Fontaine is here. I didn't realize that Dr. Nolan Fontaine is here. Welcome to the class. Welcome, guys. We're happy. Welcome to Caribbean Thought. But just before I ask them to begin, so as I was talking about the importance of, we said that the Caribbean is an invention of the 20th century, depending on it's an invention of the 20th century. So what will it be in the 21st century? But a very important point is, what is the importance of heritage? What is the importance of identity? And one of the things that we talked about in Caribbean theology was the issue of Israel. There was no Israel before 1948. There was no Israel. It wasn't not until 1948 that Israel became a nation again. But they kept their identity. They kept their heritage. The issue of preserving one identity is important, because it also helps to speak to the issue of restoration. Restore one's pride. And the important thing in the issue of property is also tied to the issue of identity. The issue of property is also tied to the issue of heritage. The issue, a people, a place, a people and a place. Those things are important. And so, of course, Israel was able to reclaim their property in 1948. And for some, there is some. Of course, the Palestinians are saying no, it's not their land. But the Jews who are very good at preserving their heritage and their tongue and so on and so forth, were able to are challenging the Palestinians, saying this is our land, this is where we hail from. But that I brought that story up, this talking about the issue of heritage and identity and so on and so forth. But and so I was quite intrigued when I started to learn about the Urban Indian Heritage Society, as I was thinking about teaching the summer semester of this course, because I believe that they were onto something very important, something that which I believe is a new, in a sense, it's information that's on the cutting edge. It's a kind of a new understanding of oneself in academia. And so we're happy to have them. And so we want to welcome them. And we are going to explore that, and be quiet. And we're going to explore that today with Phoenix and Dr. Nolan Fontaine. So welcome, Nolan, and Dr. Nolan. Welcome, Phoenix, to the class, to Caribbean Thought Summer Semester. And guys, welcome.
I'll see you, everybody. How you doing? Hey, Renaldo.
Hi, what's up, Phoenix? Good. Welcome. Hi, welcome aboard. We're happy to have you.
Greetings, everybody. OCL, Wangapo. Good to see you, Renaldo.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, we are looking
Absolutely.
forward to the presentation. So, Caribbean Thought, this is the Urban Indian Society, Urban Indian Heritage Society. We're happy to have them, and we would like to. So this is how we're gonna begin. We're gonna have well, we don't know. I don't know how many people we have 15 persons. I don't know if we have time to introduce themselves, but I gave each of you an assignment to trace your heritage and your genealogy, because I wanted to find out if there's anybody here could identify whether or not they have an Indian heritage. And Dr. Nolan is sharing the website urbanindianheritagesociety.org, and that's the website. But I asked you guys to just trace it. Some of you were not sure or certain whether or not you had any Indian heritage in your blood. I believe last week when we watched the film on C.L.R. James, C.L.R. James talked briefly about the history of the Haitians, about when Christopher Columbus arrived, about 60 million natives or in Taino people lived. The Tainos lived in Haiti and throughout the West Indies. Actually, quite a few of the Tainos were living here. But what was quite questionable was that it is as if they disappeared. No mention is made of them. And I wonder why is it that? And I said to you recently, Christopher Columbus did not admit to genocide. Christopher Columbus did not admit to genocide. There is nowhere in the history book where Christopher Columbus admitted to committing genocide. Okay. But yet still we don't know, we haven't heard of any connections. And so therefore, but when you start to study the Maroons and how the connections that the Maroons in the mountains had with the natives and the travel that exists, then you begin to understand how significant a role that a natives, because say for example, logically speaking, if you ask the question, there is no way that the Caribbean, that Christopher Columbus, when he came, they said he never set foot on Jamaica. When Christopher Columbus came to the Caribbean, he never set foot in Jamaica. However, what we know is that we understand that they were prior to 1655, they were slaves, or in the 1650s, before the British come in, the Brits came to the Caribbean. What we know is that the French were very, I apologize, please excuse me here. What we know was that prior to 1655 was that there were some natives there. But whatever happened to the natives? Whatever happened to the natives? And what connections do the Africans? We heard that they freed the natives, and the natives went. So all we knew is that there were some natives and they died out. Did they bring Africans to the Caribbean during the process? Slavery to the Caribbean was not a known fact, and slavery to the Caribbean was not until in the 1650s. So how it is that they were African slaves? But anyways, so this is quite interesting. But today we want to hear the story some more. We want to talk about Jamaican genealogy and this urban Indian heritage and this new idea that we're hearing about, this connection that the urban have with the Indian, because we've never heard of this before. This was very relatively new, and only a few people claim this heritage. But now we want to delve into this, and not only that, but from a West Indian view, from the Caribbean view, from a Jamaican view, what connections do we have with the Indian heritage? And so we want to welcome Dr. Nolan and Phoenix, who are people who are studying, scholars who are involved in this kind of research and have developed some kind of data and information for us. Welcome again. And so we will allow you guys to speak. And here we go. So Dr. Nolan and Phoenix, we're not sure who will go first, but you have the floor. Please, welcome to the class, and we will invite you to present. And then afterwards, of course, the students will have a chance to ask questions.
Hi, thank you for letting us be here. It's nice to be here. Well, at Urban Indian Heritage Society, our mission is to research and we document and preserve history and culture of misclassified and disenfranchised American Indian lineal descendants. And we're victims of a paper genocide, and we're also currently here in the United States. We're being excluded from federally protected activities. So we're committed to promoting civic engagement and advocating for civil and human rights for these particular communities. And that's throughout the Americas. We have to start here, but eventually North, South, and Central America and the Caribbean, where they took all of the liberty to change our names and what they called us for so many times, for so many reasons. I don't think you'll find anybody whose identities have changed so much. The culture has been mimicked by everybody in the world. They have taken from the Americas, but they haven't been able to present it in its original state anywhere else where they say it may have come from, right? What we do is study our families. They've given us all these fancy things to look at, and we've researched and astutely planned out how we would put our dissertations together regarding the history that we've learned for things that happened 20,000 years ago. But what do we know about ourselves? You can tell people about 20,000 years ago what King Tut's family was like, but when you ask somebody about their great-great-grandparents, they draw a blank. How can we talk about history and we can't insert ourselves in the narrative? So what we do is do a forensic family ethnicity audit research of our own families. I've been doing it for over 30 years. And this is what we do. So now there's not any documented history. I don't care what slave story they told, what horrible thing that they may have said. I can tell you what my family was doing for every written decade in America, pre-United States, after and post. And knowing that unlocks so much truth for me, there's boxes that I can no longer place myself in. I'm American Indian. I descend from chiefs and queens and kings right here in Virginia, in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Maryland, in DC. Like they have buildings on top of my family land, treaties in the Library of Congress that have signatures from my family, including the woman queen of the Pamunkey and the other tribes in the Midwestern, Mid-Atlantic region of Virginia into North Carolina, over several tribes. Treaties with Great Britain, and there's also family that had migrated and married into other tribes. And there's this whole fascinating history that nobody wants to talk about, and it gets overshadowed by what they told us to study. And then we've never sourced the sources of the people, even in academia, that they've told us to study. We've read some fascinating things and not taking away from their work, but how does it exactly apply to us? We know about great people, Nefertiti, but how are we related to her? What about our grandmothers? What about Grandma Winifred? Is she not special? We have placed ourselves, and that disconnects us spiritually as well, because we have to honor our mothers and our fathers. Well, how can we do that if we don't know who they are? And we're relying on other people. And we have a little saying, like, don't be a grandma killer. A grandma killer is someone that disputes or goes against with their own historians in their family, generally their grandparents or, some of the elders in the family, when they tell you about your family, about their history. If you have a grandmother that's 90 years old and has a sound mind, she has about 150 years worth of history that no book that I write or any other stranger can tell you about your family. Direct, tangible proof. Who is your fourth great grandparents? It doubles. We have so many ancestors, and a lot of us are 6 degrees of separation. And what we'll find is our history is quite different than the history that's taught, and probably intended to be that way. But once you know what your history is, you are able to insert yourself civically and politically, and there are different avenues that open up. And that's going to be the solution for all of the oppressed peoples, to remember who they are. There's certain rules, laws, constitutions, there's things, signatures, all sorts of land. People are thinking they're poor, and they don't even know they're sitting on top of their grandparents' ancestral lands. Have no idea. Have no idea what they're missing out on. And they downplay their ancestors, and they just think the worst of them. And, they say, oh, they couldn't read or write, and they were slaves. Slaves don't own land. So somehow you may think that you were a slave, but if you want to get, you feel like there's some recompense or compensation, you need to be able to prove that you were a slave. So that would be about, I'm almost 50. So I was born in the 70s. My grandmother was born in the 1919. My grandfather, 1914, and their parents in the 1890s. So that's 2 generations back. So when you go back 4 generations, this is going to be prior to the 1860s, to what they know as the Emancipation, where it's outlawed now. So just that far back, you're able to establish what your family was doing during these times. So you have to at least be able to know what they were doing prior to 1865 to really include yourself in slavery. You may not have been a slave. Then there's also this thing where, for whatever reason, not only do they whitewash history, but they also blackwash it. And there are a lot of people that we think are white as Donald Trump, but in all actuality, they are white men, but they were dark as Wesley Snipes. So there's some hidden things based off of where people are geographically attached to through their familial lines. And that's what racism is. Racism is not the same as prejudice or bias, right? You know, I don't like fat people. I don't like short people. I don't like this kind of person or that kind. That's bias. And racism is your family, right? Usain Bolt and his wife think that all of their children are going to be the fastest kids in the world. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's going to be the area of competition where they dominate as a family, right? Going forward. So that's two families, because not just the one that he would be related to, but also his wife. And that's how it used to be. So you have, everybody has 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. You have 16 great-great-grandparents. How many of them can you name? Where are they buried at? What did they grow? Did they own anything? Did they live in a place? Where were they living in 1910? These are the details that we have to be able to tell about ourselves in order to have the proper redress of grievances about the things that we lamentate about. Very important.
Quite powerful. I really appreciate that. And I think I had given Dane had done an assignment, and I believe you. If I were to ask Dane, I believe, did any of you? I asked you guys to trace your lineage, your roots, and I asked, how far back can you go? How far back did anybody? Was anybody able to go as far back as to 2 or 3 generations on both sides? Anybody?
No, sir, not me.
I didn't see anyone. Okay, I don't think anyone. But anyways, that was quite important. Now, just before I ask another question, Dr. Nolan, from your perspective, would you like to also introduce yourself and introduce a little bit more, some more about as it relates to this misclassification of urban Indian, and then later on we can talk about how does this apply to the West Indies, and does this apply to the West Indies?
Absolutely. I'd like to just, first off, thank you for having us here to talk more about this. We feel as though that this, affects all folks in the Americas, not just here in North America. So what I'll try to do is connect the different dots, right, in terms of how this connects back to all of us who have been misclassified in the Americas, right? And the way that I'll kind of lead in with that is, my academic pedigree. I grew up in Chester, Pennsylvania, Lamoken Village Projects, and I obtained my bachelor's degree from Penn State in international politics. I have a master's degree in organizational leadership from Newman University, and I studied as well. I got a graduate certificate from Howard University to, kind of understand the HBCU understanding, right? And I landed in Ontario at the University of Toronto, where I obtained my doctorate degree in sociology, equity studies, and education. And specifically while I was there, I focused on curriculum, specifically in prisons and post-secondary education and everything in prisons. And one of the things that I noticed specifically that what the US always gets a bad rap about, right, is mass incarceration, right? Well, one of the key things that I noticed in the research is that Canada doesn't really have a disproportionate mass incarceration problem. They have a disproportionate incarceration problem. You may be saying, what does Doc mean by that, right? So what specifically how it breaks down is Canada has an overrepresentation of what they term as First Nations or their Indian population within inside prisons. So when I pivoted and I looked at who makes up the mass portion of folks in prisons in United States, right? It's usually African American folks who are termed or classified as African Americans and sometimes Latino, as well as working class whites. So it made me kind of, dig deeper. And, around the time when I was doing this research is when I became acquainted with Phoenix and Urban Indian Heritage Society and some of our other colleagues like Tasha, she and Mr. Waldo and, things of that nature. And we began to look at, how American Indians not only were captured, but how they were imprisoned and also how they were a part of this kind of unbeknownst slave trade called the inter-American slave trade, right? Where, American Indians sometimes from, let's say, New England or, the Massachusetts area, right, would be sent to, let's say Barbados or modern day Barbados or Trinidad or sometimes even Jamaica, right? So what I began to make the connection with along with Phoenix is, as American Indians, those first contact tribes, right? And the Eastern Woodlands, the, Virginia Bay area, the Tidewater area, Delaware, Maryland, and, Virginia and North Carolina, right? Those first contact tribe areas. What we began to notice is that specifically, let's look at specifically East Virginia with the Accomack. The Accomack, had a prison camp there, which, later became, a modern day space where, they had projects, which, in Canada, they term it as social housing. And I think over in the UK, they may call it, estate housing. So, there's similarities and patterns, right, that we also try to uncover and unpack within Urban Indian Heritage Society. A lot of times we look at, the socio-historical, political, and economic, as well as the philosophical underpinnings of American Indians, how we did commerce and how we interacted, as first contact tribes within the Eastern Woodlands with a lot of these corporations that came to our shores. One thing that I appreciate about the assignment that Reverend Renaldo gave out was, a lot of times when we understand, our family histories and everything, it allows us to put ourselves in the narrative, given, like I said, how we have had very sordid histories, with various European and later US corporations, whether we're talking about, the state or, corporations that make up the state, right? We could even look at the Dole Company and how they kind of were deputized by the state, post Civil War at, 1880s and such. These are all kind of imperial, I don't want to say so much colonial, but more so imperial acts of empire. And I thought it was very, it was a very analogous how you tied in Israel and the Palestinian struggle and how that is an imperial struggle because there is an occupying force on, indigenous Palestinians' land at this point. And I definitely see the shared struggle in that, right? But specifically going back to putting ourselves in the narrative, understanding and really digging deep to know and, go through a various array of documents that, we use in family forensic ethnicity audits, and I'll get a little bit more into that as a qualitative research methodology next. When we look at those documents, that census data, real estate records, birth certificates, marriage certificates, military records, newspapers, Bibles, sometimes photographs, right? All those different pieces of the puzzle help to give us a clearer picture of what our specific family and kin were doing at that respective time. So, in terms of history, there can be a narrative that, specific areas of where we come from may have been doing commerce with the French, some may have been doing commerce with the English, and understanding, why our folks may have migrated to certain areas. Specifically, I'll use my family, for example. My grandfather's grandfather was born in the mid 1800s. And of course, in America, a part of our history, we know in the 1860s, that's when the Civil War started. My grandfather lived in Maryland, and unfortunately, he was caught up in an indenture. And, from that time before, I saw and read my family on the Free People of Color rules. Now, that is a totally different narrative than what we've been, given in a bourgeois educational system and our grade schools and our high schools, right? That a lot of us were quote unquote enslaved. But when, we do the actual research on certain members in our family, in aspects where they were quote unquote enslaved, a lot of times it wasn't perpetual. From, my specific research on my family and other American Indians that I've encountered. So when I saw that he was indentured for 3 years and then moved to West Virginia, I asked myself, why would he move to West Virginia, which is a primarily fresh-faced state where, not a lot of, melanated folks live nowadays. But then when I inserted my family in the narrative over top of, U.S. history, I understood that West Virginia was a free Union state after 1863. And that's where he camped out until the end of the Civil War. So for me, putting my family in the narrative helped me to understand U.S. and geopolitical history a little bit more better than what I understood, just reading it in a university class, right? The last thing that I want to land with is the family forensic ethnicity audit. If I could, Reverend Renaldo?
Yes, you could, but before you get into that, because I'm going to ask you a question as it relates to that, for what that audit is, because I think that's a level.
Sure.
That particular audit is one of the tools and the resources that you are using to help to come to the conclusion that you have come to, that you are making, in terms of linking many of people from the West Indies, people who are African, or who originally thought that were African American, with their Indian roots, and this is quite interesting. But before that, I asked the question: why is it important for us to, or why would our peoples not have a sense and understanding of any roots that go beyond anything? If you go to Dane and several people, and Susie and several other persons who did the exercise, I asked them to do the exercise in terms of how far can you trace your roots, how far can you go back. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm going to redo mine after the presentation that Phoenix gave and what you just gave, Miss Dr. Nolan. I'm going to ask you guys to redo the homework based on what we're hearing from Dr. Nolan Miss Moon here. But I asked the question, and where are we getting our information? Many of us, when I looked at some of the assignments, many of they point to some European heritage, and many of them point to some African heritage. But there is nowhere where, and I think some of the students went through ancestry.com, and but there was no Indian heritage. But of course, many of the students, in a sense, there is a bit, when you start to look at the heritage and the lineage and the roots, it's, you can't, there is only a report on one side, or there is some lineage or some generation that's missing. There is something that the information is lost somewhere. And so I say to people, why is it that when you study our history, the West Indian histories and so on, sometimes when you go, it's as if you cannot find the full heritage. Whose interest would this benefit? I mean, and is it conspiratorial to think like that? And is it conspiratorial to get like that? For us to get that. Any comments from the group, from the class? Dane, are you there?
Yes, sir, right here.
Yes, where did you get your, talk about the information. How did you come by your information? Tell me share with us about your genealogy, your history, and what you presented, and how you come by that information, and where, and why is it that you want to go, you weren't able to go as far, and why? Tell me a little bit about it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So, as sir had suggested to you, well, my brother had done an ancestry.com search, because he's in America, and he did it, and the results that I presented was what he would have gotten from ancestry.com. As sir said, unfortunately, we had to go so far to get the information. My family, basically, my father's side of family, we know very little, if anything at all, about them. My mother is dead, my grandmother is dead, and those are the persons whom we would have been able to get some good information from. So when he did the ancestry.com search, I'm trying to find, here it is. So the ethnicity estimate, notice an estimate, that we found was Nigeria, 42%.
Yes.
Ivory Coast and Ghana, 26%. Benin and Togo, 22%. Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantu peoples, 5%. And Sweden and Denmark, 5%. So basically, if you were to summarize it, you could say we are 5%. Based on Ancestry.com, we are 5% European and 95% African. There's no Indian heritage here. I went and did a little bit more research, and was trying to look at, because one of the features that I have always been fascinated with in my family is that my mother is fairly light-skinned, not as dark as I am, fairly light-skinned. I noticed that my mother also had what we would call in Jamaica, Chinese eye. And in fact, I didn't say this in the report, but I remembered one of my brothers, when he was born, my mother told us when he was born, he was very light-skinned and had Chinese, very, very Chinese looking, and what we in Jamaica would call pretty hair, straight hair and so on. And this even comb his hair and put it in ribbons. That's how much he looked seemingly Chinese. But there's no Chinese here in account to Ancestry.com. So I went and did some search on these different peoples that were mentioned in the ancestry. And I found out that I think somewhere among the Bantu people, they have that similar looking eyes and the light skin. And in fact, a picture of my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, also shows she was dark, but she also had that similar facial features with the eyes. So maybe the skin color, lighter skin color, may have come from the European side, but it will appear that the other features, both of my father and my mother, would have come from the African side. One thing to note, sir, which I don't know if I've mentioned that in the report. My father tended to be hairy skin. So most of us, like my brothers and I, we all have that hairy skin feature. Yes, so my father was hairy skin. And well, from what I have observed, I could be wrong, but from what I have observed, most of the people I have seen from the African descent don't usually have hairy skin. I find that Indians tend to have hairy skin. So I don't know if I had the privilege to search my father's background, I probably could have come out and found out that he had some Indian ancestry in his background. Incidentally, my father is from Hanover, Trelawny side,
Yes.
which is where the Indians is said to have escaped to the mountains. So I don't know, maybe he had some Indian heritage in his background.
There we go. So now you are pushing the bar a little bit and finding out a little bit more. That anyway, as it relates to the ancestry.com, just before Dr. Nolan comes back, because he asked a question about did they do any DNA sampling? Because I was going to ask you, Dane, do you know how ancestry.com conducts their
I think you have to
study?
send them a sample as a blood. I think you send them a blood sample and they do the DNA testing from there.
Okay. And do you know the ideology and the philosophy of their blood sampling, of their testing, the ideology?
No, I don't.
Because of course, yeah, one of the things you want to ask is, are they of the opinion that the Indians were all wiped out? I mean, would they have any blood of the Taino people, or the blood that they would have had? Yeah. They would have assumed that, or they could not have been Taino people or Indians, and so they just made an assumption about the origination of the blood, and then match it against other. Do you know that? I mean, do you know how this is done? We're not sure. Do we?
No, don't know.
Because I'm thinking the assumption is that the Taino people were all wiped out. And so therefore any assumption and any matching that's being done is being done under that assumption. African. Right. But is that but is that correct? But anyways, those are some of the questions. And now you're pushing the bar talking about Hanovan and the mix between the Maroons in the mountain as against the Taino people that existed. Because of course we're not sure whether or not they were all they committed genocide. But as we said, as we learned from Dr. Nolan, there was some inter-American slavery that took place. But some of them even went to indentured servitude. But whose interest? But it is not in the interest of the people who captured the people who captured the Americas. Okay, for them for any future claim to be made. So of course it's good to make people disappear. Anyways, but Dr. Nolan, I'm being troublesome here. Continue. You're about to talk about your some of your methodology in terms of your forensic sampling. Nolan? Phoenix, are you there?
I'm here.
Sorry. I couldn't hear you.
No problem. One of the things that I brought up specifically, and I appreciate you, Mr. Dane, for sharing that about your family. One of the things that I specifically was asking in the chat was, was genealogy, was that something that you and your brother did, or did your brother submit a DNA sample? So I heard about the DNA sample, so I appreciate you sharing that as well. One of the things that, we conduct at Urban Indian Heritage Society and that we pride ourselves at kind of refining is the family forensic ethnicity audit, which is a qualitative research methodology type. So this would kind of be our method of analysis in a sense, in terms of how we conduct our genealogical searches for our families and for others, right? So it entails a multitude of things that we conduct, which would include graphology. A lot of times in a lot of historic documents, one thing that is kind of fading out with the current Common Core bourgeois educational standards that we have here in the United States is penmanship and cursive is no longer a requirement. So a lot of the younger generation who may have been born post 1999 really don't know cursive writing or script, nor do they know how to a lot of times sign their names. So that's one thing that we pride ourselves at Urban Indian Heritage Society, is that we're able to kind of unpack and really dig deep in terms of looking at past documents and really conducting those nitty-gritty researches to kind of determine if misclassification has happened. One thing that we kind of term is that a lot of times we call them the killer bees or the 13s, where certain census takers, where it may have been an I on the census, for Indian. Some census takers, depending on if a specific person owned a large quantity of land, or in America, Indians a lot of times were not taxed. So what would happen is those census takers would change that I into a B to misclassify folks and thus be able to tax them on the quantity of land that they had. So that's one aspect in terms of graphology that, we look at in terms of family forensic ethnicity audit. One additional thing that we do is critical media analysis, which is looking at past documents, right? Whether that be newspapers, periodicals, executive orders, military announcements, proclamations, things of that nature that kind of give us a historical understanding of what, that specific European or US corporation may have been engaging in relations with the American Indian at that specific time, right? And we also look at one last thing that I'll share. We do about 2 or 3 other things, but one last thing that I'll share is we also look at American Indian cartologies. So understanding, those geographies in terms of how American Indians may have moved, migrated, or may have been internally displaced. So those are important to understand in terms of, when in bourgeois ideological education, they say we may have migrated. And at the same time, we need to understand specifically what political, economic, philosophical, social impacts were happening on American Indians to get a clearer picture. I wanted to, specifically touch on the DNA aspect too, right? So one of our colleagues that Phoenix was, gracious enough to introduce me to is a colleague, Dr. Fatou Diar. Dr. Fatou specializes in DNA, and one thing that makes her very unique is, she has both American Indian and African ancestry. So in terms of her, maintaining, internal validity and bias, right? She's like our A1 go-to person in terms of really understanding this topic behind DNA, right? Other than a Eurocentric perspective, right? So one thing that Dr. Fatou shared specifically regarding her family, she did DNA through 23andMe. And she explained to us that.
Hold on. Could you say it again? Say what you just said again. Could you say that again? About as it relates to DNA from a what perspective?
From an African from a West African, and from an American Indian perspective. So in terms of her maintaining internal validity and, bias, she's kind of our go-to person because, she really has no no dog in this fight. You know, she's very even keeled when it comes to just presenting the research, and that's what I admire about her in terms of as a researcher. So, in terms of her DNA that she shared with us through 23andMe, she shared that there are different confidence levels, right? So, you know, with these confidence levels, for instance, the marker African American, you know, has a speculative level. Specifically, it might be listed as broad West African, right? And that speculative level or that confidence level is only listed at 50%. But when you increase that, you have the ability to go in and increase that confidence level, right, to a higher percentage, let's say 90%. And when that confidence level is increased, the West African, broad West African speculative level disappears. So one thing that I said to Dr. Fatu is, well, Dr. Fatu, any, you know, qualitative researcher or data statistician knows that anything below a 95% confidence interval is statistically insignificant. And she was like, and that was what was baffling to me as well, Dr. Fontaine. So I'm like, so they automatically list those speculative levels on everyone's, you know, DNA output at 50%. So when I understood that, I was like, this is, a lot of these numbers may not be statistically significant as we're kind of like, you know, staking our claim in. So specifically at Urban Indian Heritage Society, that's why we, you know, lean more towards the family forensic ethnicity audit and the genealogy aspect of, you know, connecting our families and, you know, really understanding, you know, our place in the American pie. So
Wait,
with
say
that,
that.
I'll
So,
yield. And
so you said you don't lean to the DNA aspect. You lean to the more the family forensic.
absolutely. Well, you know, in terms of paternity testing and everything, DNA is fantastic. But in terms of, you know, a lot of the commercial companies like 23andMe or Ancestry, Phoenix, you might want to touch on the BlackRock aspect and purchase of Ancestry. You know, we kind of yield from that a little bit. So
Yes, and it's
and
really for entertainment purposes only. Like, they're not going to be able to tell you who your fifth great grandparent is, where they're buried at. If that's the case, then people would be able to claim all sorts of things in antiquity, right? Someone can prove their Mansa Musa's 20th great grandchild. There's a throne, there's an heir there, there's land there, there's a whole bunch of things in antiquity that were written down to the heirs in perpetuity. So how do you attach yourself to these things? Now, maybe you're not American Indian and you do have African ancestry. It's still important that you know who your grandparents are and who their great grandparents were too, right? They have a situation where now these places that with as far as what they're saying independence, but that's like the end of colonialism, so to speak, right? And in comes democracy now. So what has happened was people had this shift. For instance, somewhere in the 80s, they went to sleep in Zaire and woke up in 3 other countries and they didn't move anywhere. They're in the same house they were in for maybe 100 years. But they're in 3 different countries now.
Yes.
Namibia, Zambia, right? Congo, Republic of Congo,
Yes.
Democratic Republic. They're in 3 different places now and haven't went anywhere. Imaginary borderlines. My mother would be older than Nigeria and Ghana. My grandmother's older than India, right? What was it called in antiquity? Hindustan. It was Bharat.
Yes.
Right? Different portions colonized by different people. Some, Siberia has Iberia in it. So, Spain has conquered pretty much the entire face of the world before it ended up a Dutch colony, or prior to. So in Jamaica, the Spanish were there before the British were.
Right.
Right. So with that came Spanish prisoners from their own wars on their turf. And every time they had European conflict, civil wars, that's what you got to call them, because they're family.
Yeah.
They're still all related. Right. So now you have these different, the Habsburgs and different people that disappear. So what changes affected them in the 1650s? This is where they're getting rid of the last of the so-called Black monarchs. Right. The Stuarts are being expelled, and they're all still a part of political factions, whether they're, the king of Great Britain, Ireland, France, but there are multiple places as well. So while you have King George or King Charles II, or even the first, King Charles I, he's not only is he the king of Great Britain, he's the king of Ireland, Scotland, and France also. Napoleon, not only is he the emperor of France, he is the king of Italy also. The 1619 Negroes that they say are these Africans were brought to a place here that had Portuguese, right? Small town where the Portuguese Negroes since the Spanish rule.
Yes.
So these things happened during 80-year war. So now 1655, there's the Treaty of Madrid, and here comes Great Britain now introducing themselves to Jamaica or the British West Indies, right?
Yes.
And what's very interesting about the Jamaican genealogy is the direct connection with Belize and the Incans and Mayans. So a lot of Jamaicans actually have pre-Columbian African DNA that West Africans do not have. Can somebody explain that?
Wait, say that again. This is quite profound. Say that again.
Jamaicans and other people in the Lesser and Greater Antilles have a pre-Columbian African DNA.
Nice.
So if they have that and it's older than the people in West Africa, who came to who? So I have a twin sister, and we are still going to pull random ancestors from that little 0.001% of DNA that they use. And it's from a mouth swab. A blood swab would be too invasive, and no way should some company that you have no idea what they're doing with it, the statistics or the information, should have your genetic God matter.
Right. So you use a mouth swab instead.
Yes, indeed. One thing that they can't manipulate is the fact that we have parents. Everybody has them, whether you know them, whether they died before you got here, however your circumstances, whether they're living, we all have parents. No one got here by themselves.
Right.
So whatever it is that you find, and what we mean by forensic, we're going to see where they lived at in 1972. What phone books? What was their phone number? Where did they work at? Did they have any IDs? What did the first driver's licenses look like? Right? Big things for Jamaica. You see the beautiful pictures of the people that are going to work for the Panama Canal, how much they're getting paid, what camps they're living in, what companies they're working for. Are they working in the gold mines? Are they on the railroads? They have pensions. So now that means that's part of your reparations. Did they pay your people?
This is good.
You want to have the direct blow to serve it to these people, how they broke their own laws. They did it, but we can't do it with emotions. We have to do it with tangible facts, and we have to insert ourselves. And there's no better way than to use our actual family.
So you're saying that we have to
Prove what
start
it is that they're
writing our own, it begins by writing our own history and utilizing the tools and the resources that we have, and not just, and we can't necessarily rely on the information that we have out there, because some of that information is based on speculative facts, which is itself is tainted with privilege.
They've always made themselves look better. So
Yeah.
I will just want to drop a source where there was a governor in Jamaica, Governor Sligo, and he handed down some orders in the 1760s, I believe it is. And he indicated, now they were already free in Jamaica. This
Yes.
is where the apprenticeship comes in. And they
Yes.
insist, and they also indicate in this particular article, is that the Maroons, if they ran away from their apprenticeship, not slavery, not indenture, their apprenticeship, and tried to get out of any labor assigned to them, that the Maroons would capture them and bring them back.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
Maroons would capture them. They are the military police force.
Yes.
Right. So there's good, bad, and different things that you'll find, but it doesn't matter. You need to know the truth. We just assume that we may have been the slaves. No, well, some of us may have been the slave masters' kids, and not by rape. And there were people that looked like us that had white privilege, and we did not. And you have to sort it out. There's different types of Negroes. There's different types of Creoles. And anytime you see Creole, they are direct descendants of Europeans, not to be confused. So even if they call them a Negro, they're still a Creole, because a Negro can never be a Creole. A Creole could be called a Negro, but a Negro can never be a Creole.
What's the difference between the Creole and the Negro?
The Creole is a descendant of the indigenous people of whichever place and the European that got there. So
Yeah.
prior to that, there's a population of not only Amerindians and different Caribs, right? Because they played hopscotch, Cuba, Haiti. And this is when Haiti was Hispaniola. So it's the 1690s at the Treaty of Ryswick, and this is where the Netherlands is fighting for their sovereignty, right, from Spain. The fall of the Habsburgs, also during their 80 Years' War. So even though they're having this conflict in Europe, it's still affecting us here in our lands, based off of what colonies or what states they have throughout the Americas. So it played a big part in how our people were affected worldwide, not just in the Americas, but worldwide.
I
say
agree with you. I agree. The West Indies was actively involved in world history, and even with Haiti, because the French Revolution, and 2 years after you had the Haitian Revolution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the population of the people that's in the Haitian Revolution again. So there's in Haiti in 1730s, there's a population of 2,000 slaves on the island. Now, and this is still when it's Hispaniola, right? No,
Yeah.
this is post-Hispaniola, excuse me. Now it's Saint Domingue.
Right. Saint Domingue.
So now, but there's no Dominican Republic yet. They're still brothers, right? Before they act like they're two different people. This is Jacob and Esau acting like they're separate nations when they got the same mama. But okay. So now you have where they have this treaty, so it affects them, and now there's Saint Domingue. And then here in Americas, they're now in what's called Louisiana or New Orleans, right? They're not exactly a part of the United States. So that still has nothing to do with the original 13 colonies, right? It's going to still be a separate history, because Louisiana and that territory did not join the United States until the 1820s, right? There was no Alabama until 1819. There was no Mississippi until 1817. Look at the times where these places were founded and achieved what they call statehood, even prior to them joining the so-called Union of the United States. Same thing in Mexico. They have Estados Unidos, United States of Mexico, United States of South America. It's the same thing. They're all each different states. Same thing in Africa. They're all individual countries, all individual states, different ethnicities, political factions. However, what I do know is I don't hear a lot of talk about the Constitutive Act of Africa that was passed in 1992. And the Constitutive Act is the whole entire continent united like the US Constitution, right? Which is a federal base. And if you notice, they're actually still meting out a different type of colonization by inviting other people from different places to replace the indigenous people. And they're overshadowing the existence of the indigenous people. So what, in terms of that, what happens with that is the indigenous people lose their culture and absorb themselves into the greater population. And that's kind of what's been happening over the years. And then what white people are able to do is change their identity and make themselves a minority at any time in our lands, right? Especially here now, with them being able to self-identify, they can become a woman tomorrow. Not only can they become a woman tomorrow, they can be a woman of color who identifies as a lesbian tomorrow. There's actually a senator here in the United States that feels that way. He's married to a woman, but he identifies as an indigenous lesbian woman of color. Until he's done, he can take the pen and write himself back into the white man with all of the privileges as well.
Yes, this is quite interesting. This is good. So now, you guys. So in terms of when you look at the history in terms of Jamaican genealogy, so what has your research discovered in terms of Jamaican genealogy, and and in relation to the original native people?
Well, now the next time I come, I wasn't able to appreciate it. I used to be able to visit Jamaica when I was younger.
Yes.
But as an adult now, I would be looking for a few things. For one, I want to go to the archives. I'd actually like to look and see who are the descendants of Nanny, who are the descendants of Cujo, who are the descendants of the leeward side, right? Because they are the royalty of Jamaica, right? So I'd like to understand, and according to the Constitution, if they're not talking about the British crown at the time, then who is the king or the royal bloodline of Jamaica? They have one, and I'll tell you who it's not. It wasn't Siaga, right? It definitely wasn't him.
Well, I mean, Edward Siaga was from, I think he's from Turkey. He's from Siberia or something.
And then, so maybe it's Manley I'm talking about. Who's the one from Boston, Massachusetts?
Boston. Would that be, I think it was, what was it, Manly? But I think
was it Manly who the airport's named after?
I can't remember if it was do you guys remember? I think it was, but I think Edward Siaga, you might be right, Edward Siaga, but his family was from I think they're from Turkey or something of the sort, or Siberia originally. But I think that's what happened.
Or perhaps Syria, right? Yes.
Syria, so that's it. Syria, thank you.
Syria.
I stand corrected. Right. It's Syria. Syria, yes. But he was in Boston. He was, his family from Syria, but he was in Boston. He was.
They brought their people with them. So yes. There is going to be Syrian ancestry as well, right? Yes. And speaking of the Chinese, I have plenty of people that I've known over my life and who have Jamaican Chinese history. My brother-in-law was a Chin. Okay, yes. They're Chin from Jamaica, and they absolutely have Chinese ancestry. Again, we look at documents, and you see where they started to include the railroad. There's also going to be political things that happened in Jamaica, and there's things that you're not going to be able to find if you automatically just associate them with a slave. If you don't think that they owned boats or owned land and had things that white people needed, right? Or people needed, such as ferries or ways to get across, or even if they were the medicine man or woman, they were valuable, right? So we don't give our people credit, and they were traveling.
Yes.
Right? There's so many things that they were doing. Right? Oh, someone says Seeger is from Boston. He was from Boston. Yeah. Essentially a foreigner, right? again, so these are the things that they were doing, taking the imports, and they did transport some people. I am not saying that.
Okay, he's
in
not from Boston. He is not from Boston. It's like he was born there, but he's not from there in a sense. You know what I mean? Your parents probably
Okay.
can travel there, and your parents happened to born there. But he's Jamaican, but he was born there, and then they came back to Jamaica. He came back to Jamaica. But no, it's not from Boston in the sense he was. That's where the family. So,
But
but
if he
no.
was
Okay.
born in Boston, that wouldn't make him Jamaican, sir.
But to Jamaican parents, to Jamaican parents who were Syrians, to Jamaican parents who were Syrians, okay, so to
Right.
speak. Yeah, I have to put it into perspective. Yes,
Right, but still, by default, he would have been a U.S. citizen, right? So there's still some sort of privilege that he was able to have politically that afforded him to do that. He still wouldn't have the same citizenship, and if he had dual citizenship,
he did.
then
He
that
did.
also worked for his advantage as well, right?
I think he did, and he had to. But I think there was some issue some years ago about him and this whole issue of citizenship and dual citizenship and so on. I didn't. I can't remember. I remember reading about that. But sorry to cut you. Yes, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So what it is they have foreign people that come in that look like us, and they invite other people to come. It's a form of colonization. The real people are languishing, and the poor, the wealth isn't being distributed, right? The historical markers don't add up. And then there's again the descendants of Nanny and several other people that have 15, 20,000 ridiculous amounts of acres of the land. So
Yes.
if the people that are attached to that, whether they're the Scottish people that were sent there or whatever their ethnicity is, they don't know it's there. They can't capitalize. And what happens is the oppressors know it's there and they've been using it, acting like it's theirs. And because it looks like we abandoned it, they're having at it and we're just none the wiser.
Wow, this is interesting. This is good. One of the things that's quite powerful from what you have that we can draw from based on the research and the way we look at identity and the way we do stuff, genealogy and look at roots and so on. The issue of independence. But of course, today we celebrate again Juneteenth, Emancipation Proclamation. What I said to people is that when you look at the way in which independence was given, or freedoms or independence was given to Haiti as against how it was ceremonially organized with amongst the other Caribbean nations, and the issue of restitution. Say, for example, in Haiti, I said in one class that Haiti got their independence from, they didn't get their independence. Notice there's a difference between get and take. They took their independence. They didn't. Okay, they took their independence from France, from Napoleon, and so in a sense they were freed, and they got their independence, which was quite unique for because they weren't European people; they were African people or people who were from native lands. I understand that Dottie Bookman was part of the influence of all of this. But the thing of as it relates to France said about Haiti, you guys owe us because first of all, you guys aren't from Haiti. You guys aren't from there. We took all of you from. You guys came from Spain, from Africa, so to speak. You guys came from Africa. You guys are in Haiti today. And of course, they switch hands. French from Spain to France. France is saying to Haiti that we cannot recognize your independence because we took Haiti from the Spanish. And the Spanish who were there, they discovered the land and brought you guys there. So in a sense, you owe us because it's our land, because you don't have any claim to the land. Okay, so in a sense, they robbed. So France's argument is that Haiti robbed them of their property. It doesn't belong. But if you look in the other West Indian islands, they got the independence there's a difference between their freedoms and their independence. They got independence from being slaves, but for those who were enslaved, but in 1962, they got independent in terms of nationhood, the ability to self-determine, yes, and so on and so forth. So, but in a sense, it was ceremonial. They got their independence, and that's the difference between Haiti's independence and the independence and freedom that other countries have within the Caribbean, because Haiti. But the thing with Haiti is that Haiti took their independence, and one could argue based on what UIHS is saying today that no, the Haitians can bear claim, and that's the argument actually. And the
Yes, I
Haitians
do.
can bear claim to Haiti. It is, in fact, because many of the people.
I would say, Ronaldo,
Yes.
if I may cut you off,
Yes.
they can build a claim against the United States. There's
Yes.
some
Yes,
sort
yes.
of double cross there, right? And this is what, and this is in the 1730s. I meant to make this point before, and forgive me.
Yes.
1730s, while I was trying to show you that Louisiana is completely separate from the rest of the 13 colonies, but the French
Yeah.
are there. So what's happening in the French colonies in that they control in the United States, such as Illinois, Michigan, Detroit, Louisiana, the same thing is happening in Haiti. So one thing that is very unique about the Haitian Revolution is their population grew. In the 1730s, they started sending the Indians from there, the French that they couldn't get along with, sent the Indians that they did not get along with, the warring Indians, away, and they sent them to Haiti. So the population went from 2,000 in the 1730s to over 500,000 by the time 7, 8, 9 years before the revolution. So also, as they're creating the American Colonization Society, there was also a Haitian population in North Carolina, and they were sending them back, a lot of them and their descendants, offering them ways to go back as well. They offered them to go to Sierra Leone, Haiti, or Liberia, the newly formed Liberia. These are American colonies.
And you see the active travel that took place, the connections. So so the Haitians.
Yes, Haiti had the gens de couleur, the military regiment. They've helped fight. They helped the United States against Great Britain. The gens de couleur. So Haitian people should find out if their uncles, grandfathers were in that military regiment during the Revolutionary War. They helped out. They fought. They won at the Battle of Savannah, Bunker Hill. They're owed something for their service, for helping the United States maintain their independence and get it. So how does that work? So if they're trying to actively kill Napoleon, right, the United States, because they're scheming to add the Louisiana Purchase. So the activities are globally for them to dominate and get rid of Napoleon. So now they have the Italian throne, right? Because he's also the king of Italy. And now they also take him out as the emperor of France. And that's how they seize their territory. Frederick Douglass was the ambassador to Haiti. Right?
Yes,
there is an attachment that the United States has a hand in why Haiti might owe any lump if they do, but ask for a forensic audit and make them prove that it's true. Right? I can verify, hey, Ronaldo, does Ronaldo owe me $20, Mom? He sure does. Is that verifying or validating?
Yes.
What's the difference? There's got to be a difference.
Yes. And we
no
talk
one's
about,
ever challenged that.
And the thing is, we talk about what is, and that is our result, and that we talk about what has been denied certain peoples in the world today. It's people's the history. Some people's history have been completely wiped out through strategy and through systems and the way in which society have created systems to deliberately hide. We talk about their ill-gotten gain. Say, for example, we talk about, I told you guys about Karl Marx. Karl Marx wrote the book, Das Kapital. He wrote 3 or 4 volumes, and you guys should read. And I'm not telling you guys should become Marxists. That, I don't care what you guys are, trust me. But what I hope that you are critical thinkers, and that's what we promote in Caribbean thought and Caribbean thinking, okay? That's what we talk about, revisiting your history. Okay, dissecting history. That's Karl Marx. After Adam Smith wrote the book capitalism and I talk about capitalism and the wealth of nations. After he wrote the book Capitalism, that Karl Marx wrote the book afterwards critiquing that book, saying absolutely not. The history that Adam Smith wrote about the history of Western civilizations and capitalist societies and the accumulation of capital is absurd. It is nonsensical. It is not true. Of course, it's based from a French guy, Colbert, but that's not true. The history of the accumulation of capital and nobles and wealth that we have today is a result of violence and theft. And then, of course, he talks about in his history in Das Kapital, showing about how the serfs and the nobles and so on, the feuds, how hands were shifted. Okay, but then and as society, and then what happened is that society puts in place some kind of system to protect and to maintain the establishment, and that's the establishment. Until we talk about, as you revisit the history or genealogy, and I mean, Phoenix asked me, I owe you $20. I mean, okay, validate it. I owe you $20, but you can't validate it. But history is in the way in when we look at the history of certain people, of urban people in society, urban Indian people, West Indian people, it is as if the history has been carefully constructed to wipe out certain information that you can't even, sometimes you can't even, if you study that which is part of, we talk about two things, the periphery and the center. If you study the center, if you are studying things and you are stuck at the center, you won't find anything real about yourself and your people and your family. But then you have to go off tangent. And sometimes you have to begin with, and according to Felix and Dr. Nolan, you have to begin in your own families. You have to look to them, start seeing and I talk about anthropology. Anthropology is a very important discipline, okay? In post-colonial studies, it's a very important discipline, okay? When you start to look as people from the subaltern, when you start to look at history from below, okay? So this is part of critical thinking, and in order for us to capture the truth, and I said to you, if you look at what is happening with Israel, Israel was able to achieve just that. They were able to restore what they believe was stolen from them through claims, through some historical claim and materials that they preserve. But not all materials are preserved until you start to dig it up yourself. So this is quite powerful, and this is quite interesting as we begin to launch and to conceptualize this course. Okay. Now tell us, one of the things I would love for Phoenix and Dr. Nolan to talk about, Miss Phoenix and Miss Dr. Nolan to talk about this, having come to with this knowledge of, and by the way, Phoenix has written a book on Black identity, and you guys, I think I need to include it as part of the syllabus. The issue of Black identity, quite interesting, of Black consciousness. But what it is that you are doing a petition. Tell the students a little bit about the petition and what it is that the petition is calling for. And I think this is very important because it puts into perspective the importance of doing a study and a genealogy for oneself. Okay, because then now you can so when you listen to when you explore the petition, then you can understand the importance of the importance of validation and the importance of lineage and knowing one's heritage and reclassifying what was misclassified. Phoenix and Dr. Nolan.
Yes, thank you. So we have, we're looking for legislation to have an act passed, the American Indian Inclusion Act. Back in 2016, Senator Grace Ming, Democrat, New York, and President Obama signed off to remove different minority statuses from federal benefits and grants and qualifications, right? So this is where they take away Puerto Rican, they take away American Indian, they take away Negro, they take away Oriental. And they take these things away that prove, right, a identity of people that no longer exist. They created in this interim African American, Native American, and Asian, Native Hawaiian, Alaska Native. These are new people. We are excluded from federally regulated or protected activities as per the Civil Rights Act, which was rights of Indians. Now they purposely misclassified us. So we have the documentation of our ancestors, let's say from the 1600s up until now, where they've called us everything but who we are. On different documents in different areas, we were able to find the forensic proof that they were in fact Indians who were purposely misclassified so that they couldn't vote. They'll never have a representative, and to take away their status of Indians not taxed, all while manipulating documentation and forging these same names. So there's a unique thing that happened to us here. They teach us that we had come from African slaves, and the so-called white men gave us these names, Jones, Williams, Fisher, Turner, Thomas, Williams, right? They gave us these last names, but now we've come to know that they are federally recognized. So these white people now have had to come back and take these same slave names back that they gave us to claim to be Negro, Black, mulatto, and all of the other names that they called us except for Indian, in order to prove that they were American Indians, to get federal recognition to become a Native American. And I hope I've made that political process clear what they've been doing. They're doing it in Africa now. If you Google Kenya's 44th tribe, you will see that they are not Kenyans at all. They descend from India, not Kenya. So what happens to the Kamba people, who are the natural people of that land? They are not even existent in the protected status of people, but foreigners are. So the same process that they're doing here, there's a bunch of people that have our names and have been using our history to obtain land, grants, phenomenal, extravagant things, and all of this, population control of who has wealth or not. There's a long-standing legend that we have here, and we would always tease our white friends, like, how come you don't have any cousins? And it's like, it's not that they don't, they just keep them a secret because their cousins are the judges. One's working the fire department, the other one's in the ambulance, and this one here is a cop. And that one here is a senator, and this one here, and that's the games that they play politically. They bring their people in. Goes back to racism. They keep it all to themselves and their families in a global competition throughout the world.
So much. That's really good. And I wanted to make the point, a very important point. When you look at our works to Africans, which was a book aimed at giving a full understanding of West Indian history, from the native Arawaks and Caribs to Spanish and European colonization to African slavery. One thing that you see, you learn about the Taino people, or the American Indians, including the Aztecs, the Mayan people, and so on and so forth, Taino people. They dominated the Americas. And I don't know if when you read Our Wax to Africans and books that looks at pre-America, before the Western civilization or European civilization or domination. When you study the Arawakans and study the Aztecs and all of the people, the Indian peoples that lived, cultivated, worked the Americas. And I said to you guys, when you look at the Caribbean, I want you to don't look at Caribbean thought in a vacuum. Because when you think about the Caribbean, you think about Caribbean again as part of the American experience. It's part of the American experience. And I said to you, in fact, it's part of the American mainland. It's part of the land that the American Indians, and they were different, and as Phoenix says, the American have different, just so you have African tribes In fact, they weren't African tribes, they were African countries. The word tribe is used within the dominant view, within the predominant, within the white supremacist view, to put down other people as if Africans can't have countries, they can only have tribes. They don't have systems of government. And they said, oh, the natives, the Indians that live here, when we approach them, and when you read the book, and when you read the history of the Caribbean, prior to it becoming part of the New World, the language, the narrative, the way in which the history is written describing these people, they were written as primitive. Even we who sometimes view them, the language we use as primitive, and we don't say, oh, then we don't talk about them as having, they were only peoples without nations. But the way in which these people view nationhood and groupings were different. But anyways, the respect and the dignity was not given to these people as having any language. Their language was seen as primitive and backward. Even we apply Christianity, saying we're going to Christianize these people, because the assumption was that if the religion is not European, there is no religion at all. Okay, so the people is, but the people in Americas, they all had tongues and language, and they exchange it with each other. They dominated, and they were nomads. We understand them as being nomads, and they would travel throughout the Americas, South America, Central America, North America, and of course some of the Arawakans, they were peaceful, so they didn't want to rub shoulders with some of the other, because they were warlike. But what we know is that they dominated the islands. They dominate, and some of them traveled as far as to Africa. So, but what it is that you don't hear of this system. You don't hear of this. You don't hear of the respect of how we view and how we view the American Indians, and how instrumental they are, and they could be, and they could have been. Because of course, if you start to, then when you start to think about what happened. So I say to you, when we start to study Caribbean history, of course we want to begin by dignifying the what happened in Caribbean, and see how these people still were connected to the land and outsmarted the European, because the Europeans, when Christopher Columbus and the Europeans came initially, the land was so vast, there's no way that these group of people could have dominated the entire Americas. So there were American Indians that were in the mountains, and they were traveling and using tunnels and rivers and so on to go around and act. So, these Americans and what was going on in the world, there was active engagement. There was an active engagement. And so when the Africans, but we want to believe that we want to believe that what persists today is in Americas, that is devoid of a history that has been completely wiped out. But why is that important? As I said to you, you don't want people to have a sense of connection. You don't want people to have a sense of connection, because when people, if people can go back to the beginning, if people can connect, can go as far back to trace their heritage to what pertains here, then of course there's reason to want to. There is no independence. It's already your land. Okay, there is no ceremony. It's already your land, because you are connected to the land. You are connected, but when you study genealogy studies, they're quick to point out your connection to Africa, your connection to, and your small connection. They don't want too much connection to European. Small connections, because they are a set of people that has to be part of the lumpen proletariat. The lumpen proletariat who can be utilized at any time to sway the status quo, or can be used by the status quo to whichever way they see fit. Okay, but this is quite powerful, and so this is quite. So I'm happy that there's an organization such as the Urban Indian Heritage Society that is leading out front to read, not just to have the conversation, and to provide awareness. But they have the tools. They have the tools to do so. And they're also petitioning. And I said to you guys, this is part of what we're about in Caribbean. The Caribbean people, we are not just to think of ourselves, because as I said to you, the Caribbean, they were active from the mainland to the islands. Okay. There was from Central America to South America, there was active engagement, even among the slaves when they came here and those who were freed. Okay. And the connection that took place between the American Indians and the slaves who came and they were freed and so on. But where is that active discussion about that period in history? It is quite but subdued. But Urban Indian Heritage Society is doing something about this. And we here in Caribbean Thought, we're doing something about it as we rethink our history. Okay. And once you have come to that, then you move to action. Yes? Dr. Nolan. Dr. Nolan, you wanted to point out, we're going to wrap up the discussion here in a couple minutes. So, Dr. Nolan, so what are the next steps for the Urban Indian Society?
Well, we have a lot of things offensively that we're considering right now, but one of the most tangible things that we're continuing to do is, one, direct folks to read our petition, share our petition, and if compelled, we would ask that you sign the petition. One of our goals, as Phoenix said, is to get to 10,000 signatures. We are anticipating to get congressional action on the American Indian Inclusion Act. For such a long time, since 1968, since the Indian Civil Rights Act, which many of you may know as the Civil Rights Act, which was spearheaded by Martin Luther King, right? It was actually an act that was for American Indians. We think that it's time that, Congress, adhere and acknowledge that. And also we demand action, from the IA that, we get that restitution. One of the other things that we are spearheading as well is we are about 50 days out from UIHS South Carolina, which will be our family reunion in a sense, where we will be teaming up with AIPP, which is the American Indian Political Party, and it will be 3 days of genealogy, civic and political engagement, craft making, understanding of American Indian cultural mores and things of that nature, along with other VIP guests that we'll begin to unveil within the upcoming weeks. So we're very excited about that, and those will be, I would say, two of the things that we're specifically spearheading. So hopefully that as we said, you'll peruse our petition, and I'm pretty sure this won't be the last time that we attend Caribbean Thought. So we're looking forward to coming back before the end of the semester.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. Because I know you guys have further research that you are going to be conducting as it relates to Jamaican genealogy and the Maroons, looking at some of the archives, looking at Maroon. Looking at some connections with the Maroons. Somebody was saying in class recently, I wrote a letter to the Jamaican Gleaner, which was published. Many of you know that it was published. And from that, there was an active discussion from the Jamaican Gleaner. And there were several people that were involved, several academics and scholars and people from all walks of life that were getting involved, talking about our heritage. And by the way, if you guys can go to the Jamaican Gleaner, click on the letter of the day, type in Renaldo McKenzie, it will come up, and then click on the comments. The comments were really deep. They were looking at talking about our heritage, talking about Phoenix is posting up. And by the way, Chantel, if you're in the group, if you could copy all of those comments for me, those links and so on, so we could put them together and email it out to the students. Those are resources that I would like the students to access. Okay, Chantel?
Okay, sir, I will.
Right, so we could send that to the student. That's really good. But
Oh,
yes, Phoenix shared a file in the meeting, and Phoenix is sharing quite a bit of files so that we can get a hold of. But and so if you could get that, they were talking quite a lot about America, about heritage, and one, I don't know if it was in the class or somebody in the Jamaica Glean commentary talking about the Maroons and where the Maroons came from and how many of the Maroons have a lot where now people are looking at the Maroons and now asking questions, where are the Maroons from? And somebody was saying that if you look at the Maroons and the hair and how his family is connected to the Maroons and the kind of hair that they have look kind of the way, the hair, it looked a bit maroony. I don't know what that means. It looked a bit Indian. They have some kind of Indian, and then my grandmother was connected to the Maroons, and one on part of my side, my family side, on my mom's side, there was some connections to the Maroons, but then we wondered if she had other connections outside of the Maroons, because we were saying that it can't be just African, the look and the appearance and the conversation, and we're going to push that to the level now that we're hearing that we need to do. So probably part of our project for this course this semester is really to push the bar and push the logic a bit further to really dig deep to explore any connections. And of course, I have argued in an article saying, and in the new book that I'm writing, reimagining race within critical race theory, moving away from a hero approach, moving away from a victim approach to a hero approach. And I say to you, one of the ways we can deal with some of the challenges of humanity is to stop thinking in terms of race, because when we start to think in terms of race, we think in terms of categories, and thinking in terms of categories, the recipe for disaster. But we weren't intended to think in terms of race. But when we start to think about how Phoenix and Dr. Nolan is now arguing and presenting this, the importance of race, because race speaks to a wider issue. When we talk, not race in terms of this, thinking about it in terms of discrimination, but we are wired in a society to think in those ways, it seems. Okay, in ethnocentric, Occidental, Orientalist ways. Okay, but what we are now thinking is that the importance of thinking of rediscovering what is true about ourselves. Okay, because then it connects us to a greater time, to a greater period, to a greater history, to a deeper history. That may even go deeper than just Africa. Make the very place where you live might be the very place where your ancestors are from. Which, okay, and if that is the case, that even have a deeper connection. Okay. Which now question your independence. Okay, whether it should not have been ceremonially given. It was already your right. Anyways, but and then before I'm going to ask the class if you have quickly, some of you may have questions, maybe we're going to wrap up in a few, but I don't want to end the class. I don't want to end this particular session of the class without inviting you guys to, if you have any questions to ask. But before that, Phoenix, is there anything that you want to say before I invite the class to probably ask you 2 or 3 quick questions?
Yes, I just wanted to add that your race is your political affiliation with your family, your clans, the people that, that comprise you and your families.
Yes.
I also want to suggest that going forward, if your family is still alive, I did hear the gentleman say he didn't know much about his dad. I think it was Brother Dean, and his mother has since gone. If there's any aunts or uncles left, they are collateral lines, and they are still direct lineal descendants of the same grandmother that bore your parent, right? So they're still equally important. Those collateral lines also give a lot of information. We do have a genealogy class July 9th coming up. It'd be nice if you guys can share it out and maybe even attend, and we'll show you where to find a lot of these sources. that are super important for being able to sleuth through your family history. And at best, what's going to happen is you are going to learn what these documents actually look like, what you're looking at. You'll be able to interpret data differently. And again, there'll be interesting information about the local places that you are attached to, what their history is, and if your family has anything important to do with it. So again, I did include a lot of the links. And that's also going to help you politically, because if you all have the same things in common, then you know what you're fighting for, right? And you do it together, and all 5 fingers make a mighty fist. That's where we lose at, and other people have taken over the politics.
Yes, that is so true. That is powerful. Thank you. So that's July. So in July, and I will get the detail, and Chantal, remind me, add this date to my calendar as well, so that we can, if the students want to participate or know more about that, we can generate. That's great. Thank you so much for that. I am interested to know more about that. Some of you may choose that for research or something to do. So that's great. That's a project that you guys can really engage with. Now we're gonna ask, any of you have any more questions that you would like to ask, or any question that you want to ask of Dr. Nolan and Miss Phoenix Moon?
All right, good evening, everyone. My question is,
when you ask the question, you have to open up your camera. I want to see who is asking the question, so I could know that, okay, that's good. I know to give you credit for this, for asking a question. Go ahead.
okay, good evening, everyone. My question to Dr. Nolan and Phoenix is, if Jamaica really has urban American Indian roots, where's the evidence? Because we grew up to know that we are descendants of African people. Yes, we are doing we are tracing our heritage. And even tonight, I've learned from Phoenix that I could have gone deeper. And because of that, I really want to add something more to that assignment that I had submitted. Now, if we're truly classified American Indian, what does it mean for Jamaica and Jamaicans? And how can we benefit from this if the US really acknowledge the fact that we are indeed misclassified American Indians?
Thank you for that, sister. Thank you. Nice to meet you. I will say this. Now, if you were taught by your family that you have African history, then your family is telling you exactly what it is. But what part of African history would then be your job to be able to determine? Because in all truthfulness, legally, Africans belongs to white people. That's Elon Musk people. I want to introduce the etymology, and I'm going to show the earliest map of Africa, and you'll see that it's a tiny little place in northern Africa. And these people, historically, at least since the 1740s, they were called white, even though they were dark as you and me. So they weren't enslaved for long, and they ended up being part of the global corruption that we're all now dealing with. What we're going to have to understand is that there are people that look like us and they are not us, whether that's American Indian or what we now call African. And it is very important, specifically for our African brothers and sisters, that they hold tight onto their ethnicity. The race isn't that important, your ethnicity. So in a room full of white people, I'll let them know that I'm an American Indian. That's my race. But when I'm in a room with Dr. Nolan, I'm a Pamunkey woman. He's a Lenape man, right? We have our ethnicities, you see? And then when I'm in a room with other people that are part of that nation, we can talk to our clans, Wing Clan, Turtle Clan. You see? So I would say don't be discouraged and don't so much focus on whether or not you're American Indian. Whatever it is that you do find, it's still important that you know who that great-great-grandparent is too, because there's something that they left behind. And that belongs to the future generations. It belongs to you, and it's going to be worth fighting for. And if we don't do it, we're still going to be oppressed, and other people are going to enjoy the blood, sweat, and tears and the trauma and all of the things that, you know, are due to us in recompense. They kind of fall by the wayside, and it all becomes a void argument.
Yes, Phoenix, that goes to my next question. So if we're truly misclassified people, what is our birthright? And is there restitution for us?
There would absolutely be restitution. I did include the laws, and it's just good to know, you know, if I visit Jamaica, I learned that I can't wear camouflage. I love camouflage, but I know they're not having it there, right? So when I go to North Carolina, what I might be able to do here in New York, I can't do there. I might be able to do it in Texas, but I can't do it in California. So I did include those things because they're little things so you know how things work. How do these machines work? The police, the judicial, the legislative, how does parliament work? You can start to see the functions, right? So then when you have your information of what it is that, what standpoint you're able to argue from a place that they can't move you from. And it becomes a win instead of a loss. Because now you know, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they don't exist. And because they try to minimize us, we don't look for the solutions, right? One thing I notice about the oppressed people globally, they are the ones that possess the most, right? The meek shall inherit the earth. It's absolutely true. What I will say is they just happen to be overpowered by people that are master illusionists. Right. But some things, they're absolutely truthful. You know, there's a movie called The Last King of Scotland, and that's a joke that Idi Amin used to call himself. And even though he's from Uganda, he was placed there by Great Britain. So he probably actually does have ancestry that goes back to Scotland. But because he's from Uganda, people don't think of that fact.
Okay.
So I would just say that, and then there's the Pan-American games and the Pan-American treaties that we used to have. And this is something that the Americas has to do for themselves outside of the UN, outside of the local political machines. This is something that we're looking to do here. And once we do it, we're hoping throughout the Americas, period, whatever people's admixtures are, you have nationality and citizenry in these places, there's certain obligations that they have to oblige by, but we can't do that without the proper unification. And the way that we can do that is to us properly identify ourselves so we know where to place ourselves and tighten up the gap.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask one more question and then make a point. All right. So my question now is, all right, the Taínos, they were like the first people here in Jamaica, and they were Indians, right? So I'm just asking, is there American Indian lands here in Jamaica?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to discuss that in a genealogy class because Nanny, slaves can't own anything. But Nanny has 10, 20, 30,000 acres. So does Cujo. So do those descendants. Right? Outside of the British occupation, outside of the Spanish occupation. They got pieced off. Where's all this tourism money going? Why is there still so many poor people there? And a whole bunch of foreigners living a life? They're inserting themselves politically. They don't have an interest in the land because they're not from there.
Okay.
And they made nationality a big deal so that people just see unification as we're Jamaicans, right? One love. That's what they try to make it. But they only love themselves. They don't love the people of the land.
You know, I like to agree with that because even recently I was watching something on social media and this man was pouring out his discontent with the government of the day. And I was like saying to my family, listen, it is not that this man really wants to be violent or anything. It is just that we can see that he is sort of disgusted with what is happening. And this is the only way, the only forum he found to express himself. You understand? So probably he couldn't write a book like you, Phoenix, and put it all in black and white. But then he found this avenue to speak about it, even though, you know, the tonality didn't go well with everybody else. All right. So I'm just, I told you that I was going to make a point. All right. So I've been looking since recently to identify the Indians, you know, who may have been a lineage from our foreparents. It's sort of hard to find, you know. My sister always say the Pinups are Indians. Oh gosh, I can't identify that in the bloodline anyways. But
Well, I tell you, Jamaica
yes.
has a triangular thing going. There's going to be Haitian, Cuban, and Panama, and also Belize and Honduras. There is a relativity. Those are where the British would take the unruly Jamaicans from that place and send them to another place in Belize, right? So they can't cause trouble no more in St. Mary's Parish. Oh, we got to move them out of Portmore. They can't, they keep causing these uprisings. They got to go. This tribe here is not going to let us settle this land. They're going to kill all the white settlers, right? Look at what Cujo promised in that treaty. I've seen plenty of treaties in different languages and everything. I've never seen where the black man threatens the British government in such a capacity. Cujo promises that if the British harm one hair on any of their heads, that there was going to be like death. You can't count the carnage. You've never seen a treaty like that.
Yeah, that's
who is that man's family? He meant business. How did Haiti, a dot on the map, Jamaica, a dot on the map, have a certain control over these Europeans that big old United States did not have?
Mm-hmm. You know something, Phoenix? You just spoke a while ago of them moving unruly people from one place to the other. My son and I would normally just watch shows together, and there are times when he would say to me, "Mommy, I see somebody that looks like somebody I know so well." And there are times when he even pick up people and he will show me. You just go into a clip and find somebody who looks like this person to me, and he would always say, "Mommy, God has a template." But it may very well not be a template. It might be, just as you say, a move of the generation, and so people are identical in different places, you know. But the point I had promised to make is that I'm from St. Thomas in Jamaica, and there is this hill district, and there is a set of family. They has just two names, the McNamee, and I think the other name is Scott there. And they are Scottish people. They came in, their descendants came to Jamaica from Scotland to be to manage plantations. But what I was told of their history is that when they came and you know, slavery was being abolished and things like that, something to the effect. But when they met upon the kind of terror that Jamaicans can really reign here, they ran away into the hills and just interbreeded each other up there. So with one union, and they interbreed with each other in their district, and it is in the hills. So that's why I said I was sort of looking if I could identify an Indian community like that, because I know they are not Indian. They are brown skin. They have brown hair, And you know, but they're not Indians. They're not Indians. Their ear is like Indian, but it is brown, and their skin is brown as well.
There's
And
definitely
they have colorful eyes as well.
a lot of Scots did come in through Port Royal. That was the main place for them to come in. When you see the records for slavery, for every 500 people, now mind you, the Scots were sent there in the 1600s. So they could have very well by then mixed in with the Maroons and kept themselves away from out of everything else that happened as Great Britain takes over. If those are going to be remnants of the first colonizers, that was their experience. So again, the first Maroon uprising was in the 1500s in Panama, right? So there's going to be people from Panama that got sent where? To Jamaica.
Okay.
They got sent to Cuba. They got sent to Haiti, Puerto Rico even, right? Bahamas. There's Lucaya. There's different tribal lineages outside of Taino, different ethnicities. A Taino is just a type of Arawak Indian, right? But there's going to be people from Suriname and Guyana as well. Even Brazilian ancestry from South America. Again, I will say that again, if most people in Jamaica particularly, they do have what is called what you would say is African DNA. However, they also have a pre-Columbian DNA that West Africans don't have. And that is very unique. So they are closer to, and they have more Mayan and Incan ancestry from the original Americans than we do here in the East Coast, right?
Let me ask
Also,
you,
some of these treaties include the West Indies as well. So it's important that we figure out which Jamaicans came into Virginia. We know some that some of the people after the Revolutionary War left and went to Trinidad. We want to keep track of our people and where they went.
Let me ask you a question. So I heard you say that a lot of Jamaicans have connections with the Mayans and pre-Columbian. First of all, what do you mean by pre-Columbian one, and what's the source, and how were you able to arrive at the information as it relates to the Mayans, the connections with the Mayans and so on?
Well, you could look at the British history. And definitely that is going to be a great chunk of where you guys are going to find documentation. And you'll see how these white people were able to disguise themselves. There's names like Palatine, right? And a Palatine, I looked in the Jamaican records, and there was a General Cotton who was a British governor or British admiral or whatever. And he's writing back and forth to the king from Jamaica, other people that's coming in. And they're Palatines. I had to go look up what the Palatines are. Now, that's a word that I see here in New York and certainly in places like Pennsylvania. And those are also the primary other places that they were sent to, especially if they became part of the British colonies. So if Great Britain is fighting with the Dutch and they have Dutch captives, guess where those Dutch captives are going? To any of the British protectorates, right? Whether it's Jamaica, whether it's St. Vincent, whether it's Puerto Rico at the time, that's where they're going. So that we have the proof that not only fascinating, Jamaica's army is the longest standing army that I've seen. They have a fascinating relationship with Great Britain, and they are attached to those royal lines as well. Please don't get it twisted. They have ancestry that goes back to the British Crown, the Stuarts and the Tudors, the Plantagenets, and all of those families as well. So if you don't get it on one side, you will on the indigenous side, you will certainly get it on the other side. There's still land patents and all sorts of things in antiquity because they also tried to hide the Black European as well.
Yes. Dane, you have a question. I see your hand up.
Yes, sir, I do.
Go ahead.
All right. With regards to seeking out the Jamaican ancestry using Jamaican records, my concern is, I know that we can actually go to RGD, Registrar General's Department, to do some amount of checking on our family history. It might cost you a tidy penny, but that can be done. A search can be done. how reliable are those records in terms of linking us to the Indians, original Indian peoples? Because if we are now understanding that we may have been misclassified, I'm feeling certain that on the records, we may be classified as Africans rather than as Indians. So even if we go to the Jamaica archives and the Registrar General's Department to get information with regards to our families, we may still be already misclassified on the books. So how do we get to know the facts?
You are absolutely right. And that is an excellent question. So here's the thing. If you are misclassified, all you have to prove is that they changed it one time. You'll see maybe in a great grandparent how they were born in 1830 and they called them colored. 1840, they said they were black. 1850, they called them Negro. 1860, they called something else. And then they died black or African. It's their fault that we don't know. And they did that so that you wouldn't be able to vote, or if you owned land, you wouldn't be able to use your land as the collateral that qualified you to vote and have a say in the matter, what happens politically and legislative wise. This is how they were able to do it. So that would still be your tangible proof of the mishandling that the census and the people that monitor the ethnicities to distribute grant money, programs, and all sorts of charitable foundations, they're making money off of the people they're not helping. How do we stop them? We get to the bottom of it. Where do these foundations come from? Are they attached to any of our oppressions or apartheids? We have to stop spending money with them. Do they owe you money? Have they built a Walmart on top of your grandmother's acres?
Interesting. I would
Go ahead.
when you're doing your research on the grounds, I would suggest to you, if you can get a hold of a woman named Evelyn or Evelyn Harris. She claims to be a 7th generation descendant of Nanny. If you can get a hold of her, that would be good. Maybe she might have some
Can you
interest.
type her name? Can you
Yes,
type her name, brother?
Sure.
And I want to ask Phoenix a
Now,
question.
people need to see if they related to her, right?
This
People
is the
need
kind
to see if they related to her. That is going to be a political strategy, and it's based off a treaty, so they can't run from that. That's a government-to-government relationship. So how are they calling nanny slaves? Now they got to go tell the truth about it, because slaves ain't getting no land.
Yes, and Nani was seen as a heroine, but a heroine for who? If she is maroon, then she does not. She's of a different nation. She did not. She was of a different nation in a sense. The Maroons, in a
That's
sense,
right.
the Maroons in Jamaica, in a sense, they are recognized as of having our own nation, a different people, so on and so forth. And Nani had her freedom way before the other enslaved peoples had their freedoms. They were already free. They weren't. They were free already. They dominated the mountains and the hills and many parts of the Caribbean, many parts of the mountains and the land. So, I mean, Nani is seen as as a hero in Jamaica because she fought the British. She fought the British, and probably that was one. And her rebellion, many rebellions was part of what had led to independence, emancipation. But then again, if you were to think about it, really think about it, she already had independence. She was already a free woman. She was a Maroon. She's Nanny of the Maroon. The Maroons already had their own nations and weren't part of the British control. They were there before the British came. They didn't escape from the British. Many of them were there before the British came. So the thing is, yes, she was a hero for Jamaicans, but when Jamaicans see her in terms of the heroine role she plays, but a hero for who? A hero for them, in a sense, but not necessarily looking at her. She was already free. Okay, so she was already fighting for what she already had. her freedom. But I wanted to ask Phoenix, at what point did you start to think in the ways you think in terms of your connection with your heritage? Did you always think this way? And what it is that happened? What discovery, what epiphany, what experience you had that led to the new ideas about or the new ideas and your understanding, your awareness of yourself and your identity and your heritage?
It's not really a bragging story, but I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
The feds came and arrested my son and my nephews and some other children that they grew up with in the community. I got a private investigator. I wanted to make sure that my son wasn't lying to me, and telling me the truth, so that I'd be able to defend him properly. My mother said that she would never defend a liar, and I kind of carried on the same thing. So I needed to make sure. I spent a lot of money. I wiped myself out, 100,000 plus. And my son got 4 years. Now, he's never been in trouble before, but this is the feds. And fortunately for that, he didn't have, excuse me, siren's going by. One moment. So again, I spent over $100,000, tapped myself out. He ended up getting 4 years. He pleaded guilty, essentially to something that he didn't do, but they were under the premise that if you take this, you'll get 4 years unless you want to tell us about your friends or make something up. So you had an option to lie on people or an option to, as they say, rat or snitch on people. So he took the 4 years. He opted out. He took the 4 years. That was all that they can give him. Because he had never been in any trouble, he didn't have a mandatory minimum like some of the other children that have felonies before and other situations with the law. They did have to abide by those mandatory minimums for them. But what I realized is that the judge said something very interesting, the date of his sentencing, in front of my parents and his father and myself. And he said to my son, we know you didn't do any of these things, but you had time to pick new friends. So my son basically got 4 years for taking a picture with his financial aid check that he got from college, with his cousins and, the kids that he grew up with, and got 4 years and a RICO.
Yes.
When he came home, they were harassing him. He had 2 jobs. And he just made a way for himself like he was never arrested. And, he was trying to do things. He had his license straight, had his own apartment, working 2 jobs. And he's now paying for school because he doesn't qualify for financial aid because he has a drug felony, right? And they would pull him over and harass him. So it started with that and the parole officer, the way she would talk to him. Now, he was on post supervision. He wasn't on parole, like parole. You're just supposed to make sure that, he's not doing drugs and not committing crimes. You're not his mother. You're not his master. So to make a long story short, I was able to prove by his contract that he signed when he pleaded guilty. The feds, fortunately, you can see all of their documentation online. So I pulled up the supervision thing and I showed his parole officer where she going to stop talking to my son like he's a slave, right? So I made her quit. She didn't want to be his parole officer anymore. Then one of the police departments would pull him over. His second job was TGI Fridays. He was a cook in TGI Fridays. So they would close out late, and sometimes they get out 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. It's dead in New York. It's actually the night of a blizzard, and he calls me and tells me how this police department has him pulled over. It was freezing outside. He was trying to warm up the car. They refused to let him, and he's with his white coworker, and they're not nice to either one of them, not even the white gentleman he was with. Make a short story shorter, my son didn't have all of the information that I needed to find out who the police were, why they had him outside, to decide if we were at this time of night, what have you. But all my son saw on his badge was SKI. So I realized I was in California. I realized he's calling me after 12 midnight. So I know that that's the first shift. So I Google up the police department and I see the roster of police who's working from 12 to 1 and narrow down how many have the prefix or the suffix SKI on the name. So I was able to find a police officer, find their badge numbers, and file complaints about harassment. And then I was able to demonstrate rather my son's rights. So they kind of left him alone. They will mess with a lot of other people, but they don't mess with my kids. They don't chase my nephews and my sons around anymore. They don't feel like making a statistic out of them. I pretty much tuckered them out, and I just used the law. So I did prove that my son does know that he's an Indian. So the final blow came when a different police department had pulled him over. It was actually a state trooper. Said that his license was suspended and they arrested him. It's not an arrestable crime. But they did nonetheless. They took his car and they had him in the county jail. So that's automatically police contact. You have a violation with parole. So now this is how he's starting off with the new parole officer. So now what I was able to prove, they have him in jail. When I called the jail, I get the phone call that my son was arrested. They have an app that you can view and see who's in jail. So it doesn't have his picture. I do see his name. I see an age, but it doesn't have his date of birth. And it does have Black/African American. So I know my son knows that he's an Indian, right? But there's no race on the driver's license. So I was able to prove that the cop that stopped my son, he profiled him thinking that he was Black. My son professes that he was an Indian and they still arrest him. And this was, in fact, a white officer. So now that white officer, and when he takes my son to the jail, the person that took his fingerprints, the people that booked him, the nurse that took his blood pressure, they are all a part of a conspiracy against rights for color of law, which is Title 18, Section 241, 242 of the U.S. Code. So, and I also use Title 25 in all crimes of property, or in all trials and rights of property where a white person is on one end and the Indian is on the other, the burden of proof is on the white person. So I was able to write that down as well. So now my son was in the county for about 4 days. So I fly out here to New York and I'm looking on the app to make sure it's him. So I call the county jail and I'm asking, for the booking number, the case number and stuff like that. So I know that everybody that goes to a county jail has to see a nurse. I got transferred to the nurse's office and I asked if my son was in custody. Did you see my son in this facility? And they're telling me they don't have control over booking information. And I'm like, well, can you transfer me to somebody that does know? And they're like, well, I don't know why you're asking us. We don't have any control over that. I said, well, because I'm looking at this app and it says that my son is Black, but he's an American Indian. So I want to know, have the proper identification on him. The ladies thought that they transferred me. The nurses thought that they transferred me to the booking, but they never hung up the phone. So I could hear them discriminating in the conversation. I can hear them talking about not wanting to eat lunch because a darkie touched their arm. These are the nurses in the county jail. I'm recording the conversation. So I have 20 minutes of them talking about Hispanic people, Black people, all disparaging things. And these nurses don't deserve a license. They shouldn't be able to water plants or even keep pets because that's how cold they were. But anyway, now I hang up after I get enough details on these nurses and I take that and forward that to the sheriff's department. Then I also call back and I'm speaking to the sheriff and I'm telling him what laws they broke. So when we go to court, I made a memorandum of law. I put the New York State Bill of Rights that applied to my son. I put the Indian Civil Rights, which is Public Law 90284 for my son. And I put his United States Bill of Rights as well in this memorandum of law. So I was able to prove that the cop that stopped my son was profiling Black people and he bumped into an Indian and he still mishandled him. So the felonies that they were saying my son committed, all of a sudden now it's a violation. A violation is not even going to get him in trouble with parole. So all of this stuff that they were saying about him just mysteriously disappears. And that my son came home that day and he was off parole the next 7-8 months after that. That was the end of that.
Wow.
So that's how I got thrown into it, protecting my family.
Oh, so it all stems from an experience you had with the legal system here, and as a result, and you saw, and then you're saying that there are protections that you were able to access through your because of who you were as an American Indian, urban Indian.
Yes, yes.
Okay, that yes, so what's the next step for the urban Indian? We're gonna wrap up with just one more comment. And by the way, anybody have any more questions for Phoenix or Dr. Nolan before we wrap up? We're gonna wrap up in a couple of minutes. But I didn't give you a break, so we are gonna end the class 30 minutes. I mean, it's now 9:34, so we're gonna end the class in about 2 or 3 minutes. But does anybody have? Because I know it's your guys. It's coming up to about 10 o'clock. 9. Wait, what time is it? It's coming up to a 10. Well, any more questions from anyone before we wrap up the class for today? Okay, none. Okay, great. Because I know that you guys wanted the class to end. You guys been very good. Phoenix and Dr. Nolan, I just want to thank you guys for a powerful and an amazing presentation. Thank you guys for the work that you are doing to help to bring awareness around our heritage and about the misclassification of urban Indians or American Indians, and the importance for people to become aware of who they are, their connections, and so as to and their rights as well as individuals with a history that is not rewritten for them, that is not couched in the dominant view, but it is but we have the opportunity to actually go back and rewrite our own history, to go back and to discover our own heritages and our own roots and so on. And we have choices in our own families, you're saying. And so this makes for great work. This makes for an exciting time and exciting work for you guys, for us. I'm going to ask a vote of thanks. Who's going to do the vote of thanks for the class? Is it Romain? Romain, are you going to do the vote of thanks? Who's going to do the vote of thanks we would like to extend, we would like to say thanks to Susie, but we're going to have somebody. Dane, are you in the class? Dane, are you here? Dane?
Yes, sir, I'm still here.
Oh, Dane, I sent you a text, but it says you weren't in the class when I texted you.
Yeah, I dropped off for a second.
Oh, okay. So, great. I had asked you to do the vote of thanks to represent, since you are the class, since you lead you're the head of the class, we're going to ask you to do the vote of thanks.
Okay. All right. So on behalf of the class, Caribbean Thought, led by our able tutor, Doctor, yeah, Reverend McKenzie, I want to extend thank you to Phoenix Moon, and to our Dr. Nolan for taking the time to spend with us here, opening our thoughts, our thinking with regards to our ethnicity, our heritage, and what that means for us and what we can do about it. I'm sure that many of us are stimulated to do some more research as to who we really are. And I trust that what we will find will be beneficial to all of us. And we also want to wish you both God's blessing on your organization and the pursuit of what you are engaged in at this time. Thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to having you again.
Hear, hear.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you, Dean, very much. Thank you all.
Yes, Phoenix.
Thank you so much for having us again.
And Dr. Nolan is a very good friend of mine. He's actually my ADP, my dean, my assistant dean. We're part of the same fraternity. And we really appreciate you guys. We are looking. We will have them back at the class because I know they're going to be doing some more research. And it's quite interesting and powerful when we talk about critical thinking. This is why critical thinking is important, guys. This is why critical thinking is important. And by the way, if you were to read Our Walks to African, when you read Our Walks to African book 1, 2, and 3, those books were geared for the Caribbean examination. You just read information to just get information, but the perspective, but now we are at this level. Go back to Caribbean, go back to Arawaks to African and reread that book using your critical thinking, because they make assumptions about the Caribbean, about the Caribbean people, and about the evolution of the Caribbean people that has stuck with us, which is not true. And where was it written? Who wrote it? And for what? Or who wrote it? What were their influences? You know, last week I started talking to you guys about important thinkers in Caribbean, their contributions and their influences. I mean, what school of thought were they from? What influenced them? Because in order for them to write what they write, they are writing from a particular school of thought and a particular perspective, which may bias a particular kind of information. So when you read Arawaks to Africans for the court in your external reading, read it with a critical eye, because they make assumptions that about Caribbean and about Caribbean people, where we come from and our evolution, which I don't necessarily agree with. Say, for example, Edith Clark and Rex Nettleford in their book, My Mother Who Fathered Me. I disagree with their conclusions. I disagree with the way in which they present their facts as it relates to the organizational dynamics or what happens in family life in the Caribbean and in certain communities in terms of, they call it illegitimacy. That stems from a European kind of sociology that continues to look down on a particular kind of culture. Okay, it looks at, you have to look at the ethnocentrism within these histories. But so thank you guys. So for next week, we're going to end class right here. There's no more class after once we end. We're going to end here. We come back on Wednesday and we will pick up from here. But you guys got some homework to do. Continue doing the homework. We will talk about the Haitian situation, moving from this particular class looking at identity to now moving to what CLR James talked about, Santo Domingo, and what happened with Haiti, and extending from that. So we will continue with the conversation about extending from Arawaks to Africans and to the Haitians and to independence and so on and so forth. Okay, the homework to do is for, if you guys have done this particular homework, looking at your heritage, revisit, look at this film won't be available until probably tomorrow, because it's going to take me some time, because I'm just going to reveal last week's video today. So this film I won't release, but I would love for you to revisit your history, revisit your heritage, start thinking about that some more. And if you want, and revisit, and that's all you're going to do. You guys made some very good comments. Revisit that. Look at Arawaks to Africans. Look at Arawaks to Africans. Take up that book in relation to some of what we're hearing today, and interact with what happened, what we heard today, and what you are reading in Arawaks to Africans, and the research that you are doing to rediscover your own history. Do your own history, okay? And let's see how far back you can go. And when I said sources, when I talk about sources, I'm not just talking about books that we have. Your own family, when you do this kind of anthropological research, talk to the people in your own neighborhood, in your own family, and see what they have, and compare it with other things. Now, that's it for class today. And I will see you guys on Wednesday. Take care. And the class last week, the lecture 4, I'm about to publish it tonight. So I apologize that it's late, but I've been so busy. But you will get that. And this lecture tonight, this will be available. But I do a production of it, make it sprucey. I spruce it up a bit. But the raw one will be available via a link that I will send to you guys, that I can send to you guys as well. But I still want you to watch the YouTube channel and listen to it on podcast. Thank you guys. Take care. This was powerful. Walk good.
All right, sir. Bye.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Yeah, man.